Good day, University City, and welcome to UC Talks, a hyperlocal podcast that features conversations, interviews, and news of importance for University City. My name is Jemma Samala, and I'm the editor of the University City Community Association's newsletter. And this podcast is brought to you by the UCCA and made possible through a grant from the County of San Diego. And for more information about UCCA, go to the website universitycitynews.org. And today I'm talking to John Lee Evans, who is the San Diego School Board President for the San Diego Unified School District, and who I hear likes to take his dog to Marcy Park, right?
Yeah, I just saw someone you know there yesterday with another dog. Yeah, two dogs.
Right. Oh, two. Okay. And so we're not going to talk about dogs today, but we are going to talk about two different subjects, somewhat related to. And we're going to talk about, obviously, the reopening of our schools. And second, we're going to talk about the ImagineUC 2020 project and how that's going to get going. And so let's start off with the schools. And there was a board meeting on Tuesday, this past Tuesday, where it was announced that schools will reopen on August 31st, the original, opening day for school. And I was able to listen to it a little bit. And so there are obviously concerns on both sides. A lot of parents wanted school to start. They said, their kids need to be, there in person for better learning. And then also people were concerned about their kids possibly getting exposed to coronavirus before getting a vaccine. And so once we open up schools, how is that going to look like?
Well, it's going to be very different. I'll just kind of go back a little bit. When we first decided to close the school in March, it was a very quick decision. We realized how quickly the pandemic was spreading. And so the first couple of weeks were just the teachers were kind of winging it. And then the next month, we were able to get out all of about 50,000 computer devices for kids that needed them and did the whole online learning program. Mm-hmm. So we did that till the end of the year, but we really did not want to continue, in the next year with online learning. Mm-hmm. However, in May, when we got the governor's proposed budget, or the revision of the governor's proposed budget after the pandemic, there were some very severe cuts to education, which were going to make it difficult even to continue the online learning program. We would have figured out a way to do it, but it was just, there was barely enough money for that. And so since then, we started, the staff has been looking at different options. One was to continue with online learning. The other was to have online learning, but a little bit of time in the classroom, maybe a small group each day, so that the students might be in school 1 or 2 days a week, or alternating days to keep the numbers down. Or other proposals were like some students come in the morning, others come in the afternoon. And all of these things were pretty difficult and impossible for parents, to think my kid goes, it's hard enough in this whole, when everybody shut down. Yeah,
that'd be like a scheduling nightmare.
Oh, yeah. I mean, at least the nightmare for the pandemic, for the original quarantine was, okay, everybody just stay home. Right. Don't go to your job. Don't go to school or anything. But now, as the economy opens up, it was exactly what you said, a scheduling nightmare. And so then we started, after a while, thinking, well, what would it be like to get students back in school full time? And again, it was a money issue and continues to be a money issue because of the extra costs. And those costs are, COVID related. First of all, more janitorial staff to clean the schools, more nurses and testing programs and health monitoring in the schools, modification of the campus for social distancing, changes in bus transportation. If you can't put as many kids in the bus, how do you double, triple, quadruple the number of bus routes to get all of the kids to school? Just tremendous costs all over the place that we've been talking about. So it looked very difficult to open. This month, the legislature voted to reverse some of the governor's proposed cuts to education. And as we're speaking today, on June 20th. We're still waiting for the governor's signature because he has to sign the budget this month, before the end of the month. And hopefully it will be what the legislature has proposed, not what he had originally proposed. And so then we realized we could put together a program with certain safety measures to start the schools with all kids in school all day, every day for a while. We would have enough money, and just in rough terms, maybe for half a year.
Okay.
And so we still need more.
What happens if that money, if that money runs out? What's going to happen?
Well, but the point is, then we would have to go back to distance learning. We would have to revert to distance learning in the middle of the year, which is absolutely horrible. But the option we were looking at was just starting the school with distance learning, or just a little bit in school for the entire year, which was unacceptable. The kids will have been out of school for 6 months by the time the first day of school starts. So we decided, let's do this, because we're still waiting. The state has to decide by the end of June. Hopefully in July, the federal government will make a decision about some more stimulus money.
Okay.
The HEROES Act was passed by the House and now went to the Senate. It was huge. It was bigger than any of the previous ones, $3 trillion. Did not have much of a chance of passing in the Senate, but it did include some money for public schools. And our argument has been, so far in the stimulus money, public schools have gotten 0.5% of the stimulus money. And so we just got just a little bit, about $25 million so far. So,
and that's for our district, or is that for, that's for our district?
Yeah, it was 13 billion across the country, and it was about 25 million for our district.
Okay.
The HEROES Act has in it 58 billion for over 2-year periods. So that would be another 60-some million per year.
Okay.
So I doubt that they're going to pass this massive stimulus fund that the Democratic House proposed. But we're hoping that people will at least realize that for the economy to open, you have to open the public schools and keep them open.
Right, because the parents have to go to work, you know, and not everyone can afford to stay home and take care of their kids.
No, and well, there's so many other things. Just, you know, with so many things have opened up. They've said that beaches and parks, even movie theaters, and now amusement parks are going to be open. Right. So how would that be to have all of the kids at the beach, the park, and the movies all day,
and Disney,
and the schools are closed?
Right, right. No, absolutely.
It just doesn't make any sense. Yeah. So our risk here is, I mean, we're waiting to see what the federal government would do, but we couldn't wait to make a plan when they decide in July or August until the first day of school. So we said, rather than working so hard to come up with a very halfway plan that isn't very good for anybody, let's just try our best to have a full day in school for everybody, and we'll keep it going as long as we can.
But it sounds like there's also options if parents really are concerned. There is an option for parents to keep their kids at home.
Absolutely, and in fact, when we had the workshop, we had a couple hundred people who provided public testimony. We were able to read about an hour's worth of that into the workshop, and it was a lot of them were saying we just want the schools open. They need to open. That was a large part. A minority were saying, I don't feel it's safe. I don't want to send my kids to school. And then there was this other little segment that was saying, I want to send my kid to school, but you better not make him wear a mask. And so that was another touchy point for people at the workshop.
So what is it? Do the kids have to wear a mask then when they go to school?
Well, first of all, as far as the public safety things, they're changing day to day, week to week. Right. That's what the current requirement would be. We don't know what it's going to be by August 31st as they, continue to gather information. But yes, we said that there would be an option of distance learning for those who there's some kids with some fragile medical conditions, or there are family members, or they just simply don't feel safe. So, and what we said we wanted to do for them was to offer a higher quality distance learning than what we had in the spring. The spring was just throw it together. The teachers get a little bit of training and they're off and running, and a lot of variation.
Yeah, yeah.
And this was, so now it's like we're actually going to have, the idea is to have, specially trained teachers who are really versatile in online learning.
Okay.
And the reason they can do that is we have a couple of schools that actually already do that. Mount Everest Academy is a school, it's sort of an alternative school. It's sort of a hybrid between home school and having a credentialed teacher. Okay. They've been doing that for many years. Mm-hmm. We have iHigh.
And that's basically kids that are homeschooled, but they go in there a little bit to just get like packets or something, or some instruction. Is that how that works?
They there's a lot of variability. Some of them there's a variability from very little time on campus to a lot of time on campus at that school. So this would be more of a distance learning thing, and there would be some voluntary options for spending a little bit of time on campus. But again, it would be a higher quality program than what we had before. Right. We started to survey within a couple of days after the workshop. They started to survey. Even in the first few thousand answers that came in, it was pretty consistently showing 60-some% of the families were ready to send their kids back to school. Oh. Somewhere between 60 and 70%. Right. And then the others were not ready for that. So that actually could help with one of the problems with social distancing.
True. Mm-hmm.
Because let's say if a third or more of the students don't come, that gives us a lot more space in the classroom.
Right. Because what would you have to do then? You would have to, how are you going to keep, especially the younger kids, well, the older kids too, I guess, but how do you keep everyone 6 feet apart? Or, I know in some restaurants and things, they're putting the acrylic barriers and that kind of stuff. And are we going to do something like that for the students, like have barriers between each kid or something?
We're checking into different possibilities. The guidelines now, just in general, are you need to maintain 6 feet of social distance. Right. And if you're going to be less than that, you need to have a mask. Mm-hmm. And that's why they say in the grocery store, you're gonna cross paths with someone and be closer than 6 feet. So it isn't necessarily 6 feet and a mask. Mm-hmm. So, the mask actually does allow you to be a little closer. We're actually looking at lots of possibilities. One is that, we've seen all this plexiglass everywhere, and they might be able to use some of that between some of the desks so that they can be a little bit closer together than they otherwise would be. I understand the masks are a very difficult problem. When you think about a 5 or 6-year-old and saying you're going to keep your mask on all the time, that's a problem. And then at the other end of the scale, teenagers, telling them to follow the rule all the time too. Maybe in 4th grade they'll be very compliant. I don't know.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to be figured out about that.
I know at one point too, I read something, one of the options, I don't know if the district was thinking about it, but was to limit the class size to maybe like 10 students. And those students just would be around each other all the time. So they would just keep it within that group. So that if someone were to get sick, they wouldn't be infecting anybody else. Is that something that's been thought about just keeping small groups of students together?
Well, first of all, we were considering that in terms of trying to get the students back in school full time. Mm-hmm. And like if you have a lower elementary class with maybe 24 kids, maybe half of them, that'd be about 12 kids, or 10 or 12 in the class at a time. But then the other students would need to be spread out elsewhere on the campus doing other activities. So you can imagine the number of people that would need to be hired. Not necessarily, credentialed teachers, because that would just be totally impossible. But but having lots of adult supervision for lots of other things. And so for that, we really needed about 200 to 300 million more, because we would be doubling, more than doubling the number of adults on campus.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, and that's where the first thought was, that's why you would just come to school part of the time, because you have a small group. But now we're just looking at what can we do to get them all in the classroom. Now, one thing that you said is trying to isolate the classroom somewhat. So say for an elementary classroom, they just interact with their own class.
Right.
And they might eat lunchroom in the classroom. And then recess, they might go out at different times and so forth. So that the idea would be that group, that cohort, would not be associated with others, in a larger group for a larger spread.
Right.
And then that's where the testing and tracing comes in, because if there's an outbreak related to a classroom, or like a family member in a classroom or something, you could, sort of do testing and tracing with that classroom. If it was sort of prevalent at a school, you could, maybe do that, check that out at the school. And one thing we realized too is, once we open, we're very aware that we might have to have a period of closure again.
Yeah.
Even if it's just for a couple of weeks, to check everything out, in which case we would shift to distance learning temporarily. But the idea would be, maybe we could do it on a classroom basis, or even on a school basis. If it was obviously widespread across the district, then we would have to move all of the schools to distance learning.
So one thing you were talking about, extra people and stuff, to oversee all this, just even like cleaning all the time and all that. So the one thing I like about our UC schools is we have a lot of volunteers, parent volunteers, community volunteers. Now, is that something that we need to pull upon more for when school starts, at least in our community, to just get more volunteers maybe to help out, or is that?
Well, that's one of the things the staff has been working on this summer, because it's a double-edged sword. We could have a lot more help from adults on campus, but also that's just increasing the risk of exposure.
Okay.
And so having lots of people just part-time coming on campus and doing things might also be a problem. So there's a lot that still needs to be determined about that.
And plus, is the plan also to test everybody each day, with the temperature checks, at least with staff?
Yeah, that's something that has to be worked out. I'm not going to speak as a public health expert. Temperature checks, from the things I have read, have not been highly useful.
Okay.
Because many people are asymptomatic and have the virus and so forth and so on. Obviously, you do want to keep, just in general, we want to keep sick, contagious people out of school, and so we certainly would encourage that. In terms of the testing, we really have to rely on the public health officials about what's the right way to do it, because we could test every child in the district. If there was a way to do it, we could test every child in the district on the first day of school to make sure that no one was positive. But then that doesn't mean they're not positive on the second or the third day of school.
Right. So it's constant testing, it seems like, to make sure. So that's not feasible either.
Yeah. That's why it is being prepared, I think, being prepared and paying attention if there is some indication that there's a hot spot or something, to kind of check it out and monitor that.
Yeah. And so our 5, schools here in UC are 3 elementary schools, Standley Middle, and UC High. Have you had a chance to talk to the principals to see what they're planning or what they're thinking about for our semester?
No, I have not. And that is actually pretty deliberate, because we had the workshop on Tuesday where the staff was coming up, the district staff was coming up with some basic ideas and then presented it to us. And, like I said, we had the option of saying, stick with online learning or do this halfway schedule or go all the way. And the board opted to go all the way. So a day or two after that, there was a survey that went out to parents to get the feeling on what they wanted. I mean, which one they were going to opt for.
Okay.
And then after that, the staff, the leaders were not going to meet with the principals until after that workshop to begin talking with them about it. And so one of the things is that once we have the general district guidelines, is there's going to be a lot of flexibility at the local level in terms of how the principals work out how they make it happen in their schools.
Yeah, because it'll probably vary from school to school how many decide to stay home, how many plan to be there in person, or have a hybrid choice, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be different at each school in terms of that, and then in terms of the level, there's certainly a lot more flexibility at the high school level. I mean, certainly, we've even talked about that before. I mean, for example, I'm not saying this is what we do, but, if students took one class online, that would help with some of the scheduling kind of problems of how what time you get in and out and that type of thing with buses and everything. Because obviously a high school class can be, or if there's a class that's kind of hybrid or something like that at the high school.
What was surprising to me is I had a podcast with 3 high school seniors, recently about how they were, feeling about, going to school with distance learning and everything. And I was surprised because I assumed that kids this generation would enjoy being online because, the kids are online all the time, I feel. And so, but overwhelmingly, they all hated it. They all wanted to be there in person with their friends. Obviously as seniors, they missed a lot of the social events that they would have had as seniors. And so, I'm assuming that most of this, high school kids at least will probably want to be there in person, so, and that's something I know with the elementary school, it's easier to keep kids clustered together, the same group, but there's really no way to do that with high school, is there? Yeah.
No. I remember when it first started, we had a board meeting with our district physician, and he was just talking about, all kinds of things in the future that might have to be implemented, which we just went, oh my God, because, one is like, well, just keep students in the classroom. And if there's any variation in classes, then the teacher comes to the students rather than vice versa, which is fine for a music teacher to come into a classroom in elementary school. But high school, you don't have a group of 30 students who are taking all the same classes.
Right.
So it just doesn't. I mean, it's easy for someone, a health person, public health person, say, "Oh, this is what you should do." Just like when they say, "Well, just have some of them come part of the time, and some one day, and some another day." From a public health point of view, that's fine.
Yeah.
Not from real life, but what you said about the students is very true in terms of missing that social interaction, which is just so important.
Yeah, I think it was quite depressing for a lot of students, from what I heard. They were just depressed not to be able to see their friends. They were so used to that social aspect of it.
Yeah, I got an email from a parent at San Diego High School, and she said her son had like a 4.2 grade point average, was really into school, really thriving, and she said during the last few months he's become depressed and withdrawn and so forth. And he wasn't a senior; he was like a sophomore or junior. And so she was saying, "I hope you're, going to open the schools, because if not, I'm gonna, look at sending him to a private school or something, because we just can't sustain this for the next year."
And what's the talk about, like, sports and extracurricular activities? I mean, that's a big part of high school. I think as far as UC High, almost there was a big percentage of students that were involved in sports. How is that going to continue?
Well, that's a big question at this point. I mean, my first response when people have been bringing that up is, first you got to figure out how to get them back in school.
Okay.
I'm just saying it's
Yeah.
such a tremendous job, such a logistical nightmare and scheduling and all this kind of stuff to get kids back in school. And so when we're talking about, maintaining social distance and masks and this and that and the other things, and then you're talking about football players being on the field with, not maintaining 6 feet of social distance when they're ramming their bodies against each other. Our desire would be to have that stuff, up and running as soon as it could.
Yeah.
But first things first we need to get the classes going.
So I want to ask you a little bit about, you mentioned a little bit earlier that how many, was it 50,000 computers were given out?
50,000 Chromebooks were given out to students. So we have over 100,000 students.
Right.
And so basically half of them needed one at home.
Yeah. And so, I guess, a lot of times, I guess you just assume that everybody has access to such things, not only the Chromebooks, but also internet access. I guess we had to figure out some of the families didn't have internet access either, and we had to get that, situated for them too. And I was looking at some of the stats of the district where 3/4, and I think this was talked about real quick at the board meeting too. 3/4 of our students of color, 60% have free and reduced meals, 27% has English as a second language, 15% take special education services, 1/3 are under age 9, 8% are from military families, which may move around a lot, and 6% are foster homeless, and 22% are gifted students. And so there's a lot of things to factor when we had distance learn, and it also showed, I guess, the inequities of how education is set up. And so how are we going to try to change that going forward?
Well, one of the things that we have done is we are closing the digital divide, and thankfully to our bond programs over the last 10 years, where we've had a device for every student in school. Now, what we had was just a few schools and pilot programs where they would take their devices back and forth. So they would go home, so they could, have their work on at school. They could go home and do the work on it there.
And this was pre-COVID. This was happening before.
This was pre-COVID, yeah. And so, in these pilot programs, and then they had some sort of hotspot, for given to them for internet service. It was kind of a controlled internet of the district, and intranet, I guess, as far as where they could go with it. So that was one thing, because many districts across the state and the country, I mean, they didn't have these devices, and we're trying to, see what to do about buying them. So it obviously took a few weeks to get them all distributed. So one of the changes I think that will happen is probably the devices will have more of having them at school and at home. So there'll be more continuity as well as continuing the internet service and so forth, so that there isn't this divide of the more middle-class families, which have the computers at home and the printers and the internet service, all that kind of stuff, and then others that just didn't have it. So that's one thing that's happening. But clearly, we have been working on narrowing the achievement gap and offering more courses at schools that didn't offer advanced courses and so forth. And now this whole pandemic has just torn that wide open, because who can work at home? Well, there are more professional kinds of jobs where you can sit at home at your computer and do your work. And if you work in a service industry or something, you need to be at work. And so there's such a variability of the help for kids at home, variability in the educational level of the parents, the language differences of the parents in terms of being able to help their kids. So a lot of things that just couldn't be met by distance learning.
Yeah. And from this, what lessons have we learned as far as the actual curriculum that we're teaching the kids? I mean, are we going to start focusing more on, are we going to focus on more technology? I think we do pretty good as far as, our STEAM, STEM classes.
Mm-hmm.
But are we going to, I mean, how are we going to like adjust to the change in society, really? And
well, I think one of the advantages, again, if everybody has a device and internet connection, is even when we're back in school, we can be more customized and more individualized. That instead of you shoot for the middle of the class,
right.
and try to tell the kids who are behind, come on, try to catch up, and then the kids ahead, just wait, we're going to get there.
Yeah.
So people can it's easier to work at different levels. I remember when we first did this 10 years ago, when we first introduced, or 12 years ago, when we introduced the devices into the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like in a 6th grade math class, and they had their device
Mm-hmm.
and their whatever was the equivalent of the Chromebook at the time, and the teacher would give them a problem to work on, and she could immediately see the 3 kids who got the problem wrong, and go over and help them, as opposed to just kind of walking around and does anybody have any questions and things like that. So I think that technology is going to help a lot to more personalize it once we're back. Mm-hmm. The other is the issue of what we've been thinking about but haven't moved on yet, is the whole issue of grading.
Yes, I was just going to ask you about that. Yeah. Grading
was initially in our educational system was set up to classify students. Mm-hmm. Your top, your middle, your bottom, and this is your lot in life. Mm-hmm. As opposed to more about mastery or competence. So for example, if you're going to get a driver's license and you have to go take the test, you have to have a certain score, and you can't get your license until you pass the test. Right. There isn't like, well, I got an A or a B or a C or a D or whatever. It's just, and so the whole idea of competency-based grading is keep working on the material until you learn it. Mm-hmm. So if at the end of the semester you haven't gotten to that level, rather than saying you failed, why not say it's incomplete and you need to keep going until you reach that level? And we've had this idea theoretically, but now we're, we had a very unusual situation here. Like, what are we going to do about grading?
Right.
And
what did we do about it?
Well, it was interesting because some places said, we're just not going to do any grading at all, which just kind of undermined the importance of the work. Mm-hmm. There was one board member in San Francisco who proposed giving everybody an A, which was equally absurd. So what we did was, we knew there were so many different circumstances kids were under, is we took the grade they were at in March when the shutdown started, and we said, you can improve your grade as you go along through the year, but we're not going to give you a lower grade than you had then. Okay. Because there may be family circumstances or lots of things going on beyond your control. We're still going to expect you, just like when you come to school, to come online and do the work and so forth. Mm-hmm. And one of the students asked, well, if I just do one, I'm getting a B plus, and I do one assignment that raises my grade to an A, mm-hmm. can I stop then? Yeah. I was like, no, it's like during the rest of the semester. But we wanted to not undermine the importance of what they were doing, but not overly penalize either.
And does this bring up talk too about standardized testing even? I mean, if there's a need for it. I mean, it seemed like there were some colleges that were saying that they weren't going to rely on SATs or ACTs this time because of all this. I mean, they're rethinking about standardized testing too?
Well, yeah, I mean, the colleges were, they have a long time debated about the value of the standardized tests, how that much, it classifies students, but how much does it really predict their success in college? And so they've had that debate, and then it was like, oh, now we can't give the test. So, okay, now we'll do away with it. I thought it was funny, like the day we were, or the week we closed the schools, the governor or someone issued a thing saying we didn't have to do standardized testing this spring. And I thought, well, that's kind of a moot point. It's nice of you to say that, but we're not going to be in school anyway. So,
right.
And there's nothing wrong with doing some standardized testing to gauge what's going on, but not to make it the central focus. In fact, there's one standardized test where San Diego has actually scored very well, and it's in, they do it with a sample of 4th graders and 8th graders in the district. And so they do very careful scientific sampling, so certain students are tested, just certain grades, and then they give the district some information on how they're performing, basically on reading and language and math skills, or the two main. Oh, no, they also do science and some other things too. But that's, so it's not rewarding or punishing or making it such high stakes, because before, I mean, with these standardized tests, it was like, okay, we're gonna have these tests in the spring. Teachers are like, okay, everybody get a good night's sleep, and we're gonna bring donuts,
snacks,
and then the school is sort of they're rated on the average score, which doesn't say anything about any particular student, but then this is a good school because the average is higher, and this is a bad school because the average is lower, which doesn't really answer how it meets the needs of any particular individual student.
Right. And also, I mean, in light of, current events too, doesn't it seem that it's probably going to bring up the talk that some of these standardized tests have some like racial bias in them? I mean, that's what, it has been in some discussions in the past.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, one test, which I'm very familiar with as a psychologist, is the basic IQ test.
Right.
It was, many years ago, it was made illegal for schools to give an IQ test to African American students.
Oh, I didn't. Huh.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of cultural biases and so forth. On all of these tests, but the only real point of testing for a teacher is to see how much students are learning and where the weak points are and what else needs to be learned, right? Not, it's supposed to diagnose to help in terms of the learning. I mean, so there are a lot of teachers do a lot of what they call benchmark testing. Like, let's see where we are at this point. Let's do it. They'll do it like for a 6-week period. Let's do a pre-test. How much do you know about this particular area? And then we'll work on it for 6 weeks, and then we'll kind of test again and see what we've accomplished.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to get onto our second subject because we're going to run out of time here pretty soon. Although we could probably talk for hours if needed.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So, good news. The ImagineUC 2020 project is actually going to probably start in 2020.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us about the project? I know it's been worked on for at least a couple years now. And why don't you tell everybody what's going to happen?
It goes back to 2014.
Oh, okay.
2014, and actually at that time we have bond measures that allow for several swimming pools at high schools. I always thought it was absurd when I came to Southern California that high schools didn't have swimming pools. Other parts of the country where it's cold, they have swimming pools. They don't have them. And so
and so people know, the kids that are in aquatic sports, I mean, there's a ton of fundraising to go on to pay for the pool fees, like at UCSD. It's ridiculous. Right.
Yeah, they did UCSD. Sometimes they did Jewish Community Center, different places, the YMCA, where they would rent pools and so forth. So that was one issue. And then at the same time, Greg Zinser had been working on the idea of having a permanent stage pavilion
Right.
in the park. And so, and then we were going to be modernizing our schools with these bond funds too. So I said, let's have a community meeting for like a joint project in terms of how we, you know, and what we can do.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, with the swimming pool, we had the money to build a pool,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't have the operational funds to operate it, you know,
Ah,
because our money, the priority is to have teachers in the classroom
right.
and not to operate a swimming pool, as nice as that is. So this is a real boost for the taxpayers' dollars. Basically, the school district provides the capital funds for the pool,
Mm-hmm.
and the city operates it and provides the operational funds.
Okay.
So during school hours, for instruction, for school sports, you know, swim team and water polo and so forth, that is, you know, the school has it for that. During the rest of the time, it's open to the public, but it's operated essentially
Mm-hmm.
by the city. And so that's how we're able to do it. That's the same thing that happens, we don't realize it, with the baseball and soccer fields.
Right. Mm-hmm.
They're actually all on school district property,
Mm-hmm.
but they're operated by the city.
Right.
The city part of the park is just that very little middle part where the pool and the rec center are. You know,
Right.
it's basically what it is. So we had this whole conversation. So we expanded, like, okay, what could we do? It would be nice to have some sort of jogging path around the park. So we included that along with the stage pavilion and the pool. And then the other issue was at Spreckels, there wasn't they had one of these decomposed granite playgrounds that are horrible.
Yeah.
In other places. So to add on more green space, a green natural field there, which would be there for school, but then also to the public, you know, when school wasn't in session. So that actually allows us to have more green space, to have a jogging path around the park, to have the pool, the aquatic center,
Mm-hmm.
and to have the permanent stage pavilion all in the same project. And one little other side benefit when they remodel Spreckels, and one of the things I'm thrilled about the remodeling of Spreckels is they're going to replace some of those concrete walls with windows.
Yes.
With a whole wall of windows.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just so crazy that you're in
Yeah.
this.
It looks like a prison, you know. I remember
Well,
when my kids were going there, we wanted windows. It's like, in some ways, we preferred the bungalow rooms because they had, you know, the windows back there.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, I always said for some Spreckels, Standley, and UC High were built during this prison, I call the prison construction of schools, you know, because that's the way they were. So I was really pleased because first they said it couldn't be done. They checked the structure and they actually can just make it open up a lot. And one of the things that's going to happen there too with this plan is that there's a parking lot in front of the school and next to it is some playground equipment.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so that's going to be moved back to the other playground area to actually expand the parking lot. So there'll be more of a flow through parking drop-off area for the school that's much safer.
Yeah.
And it will actually add on more parking for the park without taking away anything from the park. Because one of the things that we, you know, like they talked about a little bit more hard surface in the middle of the park. No, we don't want to get rid of any grass, but this actually allows us to have more parking. So we've been working this from 2014. It was there was the whole issue with developing the plans and then negotiating it between the city and the school district. And the problem there is you have attorneys on both sides.
Right.
They're negotiating these contracts, every deal, and it just goes on and on and on and on. Right. And then we got and then 1 year we got into the issue of the background checks for schools were a little more stringent than they were for the city, you know. So
as far as contractors, you mean?
Well, no, like as far as lifeguards.
I see.
City lifeguards. And so we had to negotiate for several months on that, like what sort of standards, which I thought was ridiculous because, you know, everybody wants them kids to be safe, you know, not be around bad people, you know, or whatever. So that took time. And then just every little thing would come up between, the school board approved it right away, you know, a couple of years ago. And then since then it's been the back and forth with the city. And finally this year we got it, the final thing approved by the city. Then even in the spring, right during just before the pandemic, it turned out that there was one little thing about there's a pipe on the other side of Governor Drive, so they have to go under Governor Drive, and that's going to disrupt the traffic for a few weeks, and that required another permit and so forth. And so that dragged out. And so I just found out just this last week that was finally done. And so it's going to be put out basically to bid within the next week. And they have about a month or 3 weeks or something when the different construction companies can bid on the project. And so then it will come back probably right when we first start school. It'll come back to the school board just to approve the contract, and then they can begin construction.
Yeah, that's great. And so for the pool, I'm just trying to picture in my mind, the pool building stays intact the way it is, and then we just like take some of that space back there to create a new pool. Is that what's going to happen?
Yeah, it's right next to it, so it's an addition. And we can only build it on school district property.
Okay, so that's
right
okay, yeah.
So on the Standley School side of the pool will be the other pool, and that pool will be a separate pool. There'll be a sort of a movable barrier fence between them, depending on what's going on, and it will have its own locker rooms and so forth for the students and the children to use at school. But then, in the summer, weekends, whatever, both pools will be open for the public. So it would be more like an aquatic center in that way.
Oh, cool. And obviously that's going to be like Olympic size where we could have, swim tournaments and everything.
That's the whole point, because they couldn't use Standley Pool for anything.
Yeah. I think that's exciting, and I know with the, with the pavilion at the park, I mean, we have so many events. Hopefully we can have these events again. Hopefully next year we'll have our big 4th of July and Oktoberfest and our summer concerts and everything. So the pavilion, is that going to be on the governor's side or on the canyon side of the park area, the middle park area?
It's going to be, it's not going to be in the center of the park, which was the original plan.
Okay.
That's what we dealt with for a long time. It was absolutely impossible to do it because the school district cannot build anything on city property.
Okay.
And it has to be for educational purposes, and the park is a recreational park, and so that's why we couldn't do it. So we said, even a few years ago, we said, if someone miraculously comes up with the money, of $500,000 or something to build this whole thing in the middle of the park, in the center area, the preferred area, that would be fine. But we're going to go ahead with this because that's so unlikely. So it's going to be a change, but it's going to be closer to Standley Middle School. If you kind of think of where the baseball fields are, and kind of there's some stairs and a hill coming down towards the middle back of the park, and so it faces out. So really, what's going to happen is, and it's going to have good sound system and electrical, things, so that when people set up booths and things like that, just like it is with the rec center, they'll have all of those connections there. We're going to put in lighting, around it. So because my thing too was that park is just so dark to go to at night.
Yes.
And so there'll be more lighting around that stage, that kind of spreading out in both directions, so that will light up that part of the park a little more. So that's going to be, that is a change but there's this wide open space in there where all kinds of things can be set up.
No, that's exciting. So,
yeah.
And I do like the idea of the jogging path too, and stuff like that. So is there going to be spots for like little exercises, or like, do 20 push-ups here or something?
Yeah, I hope we can put some of those along there. There's there's a little detail there because the middle part of it is on city property. So that's where the whole thing came about. It's like an $8 million project, but the city had to put in like $70,000. you know, just because part of the
A part of it.
jogging path was right there.
Yeah.
And, you know, but it's basically so you can kind of pretty much run around the perimeter. I mean, it sort of goes, it's not perfect. It goes kind of around the park, and then the sidewalk and Governor Drive is, you know, part of the circle, obviously, for the front part, and then it goes back up to Spreckels. And even in Spreckels, besides that, they're going to, on their big field they're going to have a track around their grass field too.
Okay. Oh, that's
nice. For their running club that they do there too. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. My kids love that running club, by the way, when they were there. So.
Yeah.
Well, that's good to hear. We're excited. We're excited that hopefully we'll start seeing some construction in the fall this year of the.
Yes. I will. I'm very eager to have the groundbreaking.
Yeah.
Once the shovel is in the ground, there's no turning back. I'm going to put in the shovel deeply, so that,
and we'll get it done in 2020 the way it was supposed to. Yeah. Well, that's good. So anyway,
it'll take a while to build it. It'll take a while.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
But it'll be under construction in 2020.
Right. And then, so before we go, I guess everyone should know that. So you've decided not to run for reelection.
Right.
Your last year. So when does the actual year end for you? When is your term?
Well, the election obviously is in November, the general election, and then the term for school board is in December,
it's
the second week of December. So
okay, I was thinking you would finish off the school year, but I guess that's how.
No, it's not by the school year because it's by the election years. So
okay.
So like I think city council, they probably start at the same time in December or January, and the same thing with the school district. So it was really disappointing to me this year because in terms of not having the graduation at UC High and other places, because we when I got on the school board, the class of 2020 was in first grade, and we based our whole Vision 2020 on what we were going to do during those 12 years.
Yeah.
To complete the plan, and so we were going to have this big final thing, and it's kind of anticlimactic, and it was sad for these kids. Not have a regular graduation.
Yeah. Well, they've sure learned something from this experience. I'm sure we all have too. And so are you going to go back to well, I don't know if you I'm sure you still currently practice your psychology practice.
Yeah, I've had a full-time practice the whole time been on the board. The school district is technically a part-time kind of thing, but there's always a lot going on. I guess another crazy bookend is that when I came on the board in 2008 was the beginning of the Great Recession.
Oh.
And so we had 3-4 years of just massive cuts from starting a month after I got on the school board. And now we're facing this in 2020, this huge financial crisis, because it's going to be around, for a while, because the tax base has gone down so much, which is what our argument is for the federal funding, because the state is giving us as much as they possibly can.
Right.
From what they have.
Okay. So. All right. Well, thanks. We hope to see you in the future to continue with community projects and everything. You've been really a benefit not just to San Diego Unified, but to the university community for all your work for us. So we really appreciate it. So
well, I'm not going anywhere, both in terms of community and in terms of education. I'm just gonna someone else take my seat for now.
Yeah, and we'll see you at Marcy Park.
Yes, exactly. Close by.
And then so thanks again, John, for joining me today for UC Talks, and we look forward to both schools reopening and the completion of the Imagine 2020 project. And a big thanks for your service to the community. Once again, this podcast is brought to you by the University City Community Association and made possible through a grant from the County of San Diego. For more information about UCCA, including membership, go to our website at universitycitynews.org. And remember to follow UCCA on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks again, and have a great day. And remember, University City is more than just a neighborhood.